Good morning and welcome to episode 106 of the Jaguars on SI podcast. My name is Gus Logue, brought to you, joined always. Wow, we were doing so well, John. We were doing so well.
You
I'm here
nailed
with
it.
John, we're here to talk about just off-season topics. Yeah, you start talking.
Yeah, no, you nailed the first part of it. Not gonna lie, that kind of got me like.
As soon as he gave a fist bump, it jinxed me, and I started malfunctioning.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard for me to get the energy up for these early morning podcasts, and that refilled my tank, and then whatever the hell that was after, yeah, it kind of emptied it right back. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, like you said, off-season topics. There's not a lot going on right now. We just had our best week on the Jaguars on SI YouTube channel, over 1,200 views in a week. It helps that we posted, I believe, 4 different things. You can find our shorts from each episode with graphics and everything added in from Dale Phonic on Twitter. You know,
Shout out Dale.
Best content guy there is out there. I can't describe, what a game changer he has been, and will be. Off-season, Gus. We said we were going to have like a top 10, and we didn't. We didn't coordinate it.
Yeah, we can come up with one. Maybe next week.
I got an idea for next week, and
I've got 2 good ideas actually.
Okay, my idea is going to be Jaguar specific. Are your ideas Jaguar specific, or are they just?
No, mine is kind of like, like league at large, almost, but like including the Jaguars.
I thought you were going to ask for like rank your top 10 James Cameron movies or something like that.
No, not quite. We're not at that point.
I don't want to do pop culture anymore, Gus. After we got.
I feel like we should aim for at least one pop culture during the off season.
Yeah, well,
it's fun.
Yeah, as long as maybe we plan it before. Look at the completely male-dominated list.
Yeah.
Nonetheless. Well, the only real thing of note that's happened, last few weeks is since the Jaguars, of course, closed their offseason program, they're going to be starting training camp. What is it? July 19th, I believe, is when rookies report, and July 23rd is when veterans report. So
yeah, the 23rd, 24th.
Yeah, you'll start getting content coverage a few days after veterans report. That's when practices will actually start. The first few days of training camp are fairly useless until they get into pads, and then things start amping up a little bit. But other than that, and Trevor Lawrence signing his deal, which we talked ad nauseum, last week about, not as much going on. And Trevor Lawrence will talk today about his contract. It will just be Trevor at the press conference. Not like Josh Allen after he signed his deal. I mean, it's not earth-shattering or anything, but first chance to talk to Trevor Lawrence since signing his deal. Tony Khan obviously talked about it this week on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. He said some other interesting things. I'll have transcribed and stuff on Jaguars on SI. Always interesting to hear Tony talk Jaguars, and listen to it yesterday. He has said it before, but he literally, they didn't have like analytics until the Khans like bought the family. So it's interesting to see, as bad as the Jaguars have been, in the past however many years, how bad they could have been. But other than that, all right, Gus, Jaguars are named one of the teams under the most pressure, I believe, by Pro Football Focus in 2024. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. 1, do you agree or disagree with that? And then 2, which players do you think specifically are under the most pressure to perform in 2024?
I think that's probably fair to say. I mean, I feel like national media kind of views like the Jags as like kind of just like a middle class team, and like we'll see what happens. But then like the Jags, their expectations within the building are certainly very high, and so I think like even like it's fair to put them under a lot of pressure, because I think they're putting themselves under a lot of pressure. And then I think the 2 players that'll be under the most pressure are the 2 players who signed like the 2 biggest contracts in franchise history this offseason. I think like everyone kind of knows that Josh Allen had a big breakout year last year, and it's not exactly going to be easy to replicate his single season franchise record of what was it, 18.5 sacks. So even if he doesn't even have to replicate that performance necessarily, but he at least needs to like continue to play at like a Pro Bowl caliber level, basically. And then same with Trevor. Like I think obviously the Jaguars were confident enough to sign him to a contract without like there being a long, extensive period of like production. But now that he's signed, like that's definitely the expectation going forward. And so those two players already put like the world of a world of weight of expectations upon themselves. And so I don't think it's anything that's like going to have an effect on them or anything like that. But I would say that like Trevor and Josh need to perform the most, not only because they're the two best players, but because they were paid like it too.
This might be too simplistic because football is obviously not this, black and white, but can the Jaguars afford to be anything worse than 9-8 during this next like course of like Trevor's like contract?
I don't think so. They've
That
like
has to
put
be like the
too
worst
much
like they
into
can
it.
be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that feels like the floor at this point. It is
Yeah,
pretty fun how they finished 9-8 in 2 seasons, and it's just like such a opposing feelings at the end of each season.
that's right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It really seems like from like a national consensus, the Jaguars just kind of shrugged at. It's like I'd say with other teams that it seems like people just kind of tuned out this offseason, like Arizona kind of. Uh, doesn't really seem like anybody cares what's going on in Las Vegas. I know I
No.
don't.
Everyone's down over there.
Yeah, I know I don't. So, I mean, like you said, it's funny because the Jaguars had just become like finally media darlings, and they did the same thing back in 2017. Like they go through a cycle where they go from they're only being talked about when they're being like joked about or digged at, and then they finally play well, and people start to take notice, and then people have expectations the next season, and then they more or less, pee down their leg the following season, and people stop caring. So I mean, it just shows that get people to care, you have to actually consistently win. That's why people consistently care about like the Baltimore Ravens. That's why people consistently care about the Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, I mean, the New England Patriots, during the Tom Brady Belichick era, they were always the most talked about team. They weren't the sexiest team, but when you win, people are going to be invested. So it's
For
kind of
sure.
shows you like what the media perspective is on this Jaguars team specifically. I do think they're under pressure to perform. Like, I think the Trevor Lawrence contract obviously kind of puts the whole team like some pressure on them. Not just Lawrence, but Lawrence obviously is under a lot of pressure now that he's, one of the highest paid quarterbacks. He's only 24, 25 years old thing is going to start becoming a bit, sooner and later. And I did a podcast on the Purple Insider podcast with Matt Kohler this week, and he was like, "Yeah, once you get to like the 5th or 6th year saying it's everything around him, it's probably not." So, not
Yeah.
to say that they're in that mode, but it is at the point where I think, okay, he's a 4th-year pro now, 3rd year in the system, probably time for some consistency overall as a franchise. So, I do think that contract definitely puts the team under pressure to an extent. I'm curious how much pressure like the leaders of the team are on though. I don't know, man. Bearing like them picking like top 3 overall, I can't see Trent Baalke being fired. He has basically like done a lot of long term type moves, like moves I think a general manager makes if he's expected to be around a while.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's just be like you don't get personally like tip of the cap by the owner in a statement after the quarterback signs the biggest deal in franchise history for the owner not to, be a fan. Like he more or
Right.
less saved Shad Khan a ton of money, moving forward. So Shad Khan's obviously a Trent Baalke fan right now. So I don't think the front office is under any pressure. You think Doug's under pressure? You think a sub 500 season? You think some heat would be on Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is like one thing that national people can kind of get a grasp on too, just because they see Balky's experience in San Francisco and the way that his tenure kind of ended in a power struggle with John Harbaugh, but he was still able, or Jim Harbaugh. I know. I corrected myself before you could get me. But he outlasted Harbaugh, and so I think everyone's expectation is that like if they were, not even if there was a power struggle, but if there was just some differences and kind of like someone had to go, then chances are that Balky will be able to stick around. And so he's been around in Jacksonville already longer than Peterson. And I think that Peterson, like, yeah, I think you can probably point to Lawrence and the offense's production and say, like, hey, you won a Super Bowl as an offensive coach and you just like haven't brought enough of that here. Like, I think it might be a little bit different if like Lawrence somehow finished like top 8 in touchdowns and they were like somehow still like picking top 3, then maybe like there's a way where Balky is the one that's out. But yeah, I just don't really think that's realistic. I
Yeah,
think
no, I'm
Peterson
with
is
you.
definitely the one like organizational figure that's on the hot seat the most for sure.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Trent Baalke has some sense of security. I mean, he's even the ranks have been closed this offseason. He's added a lot of guys who are fairly close to him in the front office over the last couple of years. Like
Yeah.
really, I think we talked about this offseason after Tom Campbell came back, but it's like the most like Trent Baalke front office it's been during this tenure. And that is one thing about being a general manager. It can very much so be politics. I just the one thing I can never get out of my head is whenever a team is struggling, the coach is on the field calling the game. The owner is in the box with the general manager. The general manager can be like, no, this is, not saying that's in this case. I'm just saying for like every NFL team.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of like front office stuff is politics. And I mean, Baalke, to his credit, look back San Francisco. Yeah, you're two coaches after Harbaugh. And I mean, he survived the Urban Meyer debacle. So it's pretty. I mean, Bill O'Brien got an interview, so it's pretty clear that he knows how to play the game. I agree with you. I think Doug's definitely under pressure for the team and the offense specifically to perform and probably get over a hump. So I agree with you. Some other players I think are under pressure. Ah, man, that's a tough one. I'd say
Tyson Campbell is the first or the
next
comes to mind for me because I don't know if like necessarily everyone outside of city limits are placing a lot of expectations on him. Like the expectation is probably like, oh, this guy has flashed before, so maybe he can like put it all together and like make a Pro Bowl this year or something like that. But I think for the Jags, like their cornerback room is Tyson and then an older veteran and Ronald Darby, who's like more of a steady presence, but probably won't deliver as many like highlight plays even as Darius Williams did last year. And then kind of just like a rotation of young guys on rookie contracts, basically. And so I think the Jags are really expecting Campbell to be like not just one of their 2 starting cornerbacks, but a number 1 cornerback that's able to take away a larger portion of the field than anyone else. And I think that's like a big way that they built their cornerback room. Like we've talked about the edge depth and how like there's not really a lot of bodies there. But I part of the reason that they don't have a lot of depth is because they're so confident in their top 1 or 2 guys. And so I think it's kind of the same with the cornerback room where like even if the depth might not be amazing, like I think part of the reason that they haven't overly invested in it or like felt like they didn't have to take a cornerback in the first round in April is because they're so confident in Tyson Campbell being, again, not just a startable cornerback, but like a cornerback 1 who can take away opposing number 1 options. So I think in Jacksonville, in the building, there's a lot of expectations on Tyson.
I think that's fair. I think, you talk about players eligible for extension, and it definitely seems like Tyson's like the front runner over guys like Travis Etienne and Andre Cisco. So definitely, seemed like the franchise has big aspirations for him. And when healthy, he's played well. That's an objective fact. Other than the like month that he randomly played slot corner for Joe Coleman and Urban Meyer. When healthy, he's been a good football player. His struggles have been when he's not healthy, and like a third, I'd say, of his career so far has been, he's not been healthy. So that's the biggest thing with him. I think Trayvon under more pressure than Josh. Like, yeah, Josh to an extent has to prove that it wasn't like a contract year thing, but I think Josh has done enough to establish himself as like a dude in the NFL.
Yeah.
Trayvon's biggest fans are undoubtedly in Jacksonville, so I think, for him to start to win over and, I say all the time, these conversations don't matter, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people are saying they should have taken Aiden Hutchinson. That impacts nothing. You've already made the move. Now it's just time to see how it plays out. But for the scales to at least balance a little bit, I think he's under, some pressure. I think he ranked like top 25 in pressures last year, but he wasn't even top 50 in pass rush win rate. Played a lot of snaps, had a lot of pass rush snaps. Obviously, it didn't rotate guys very often. I think for him, pressure to become more of that kind of game wrecker like Josh Allen is, where you're getting not just sacks, but consistent pressure. And I feel like that's the thing that they've missed from Walker in his first 2 years as he's developed. And it takes guys 3 years sometimes. I believe Rashawn Gary, took him about the same time. he was my comp for Trayvon coming out. But I definitely do think there's pressure on Trayvon to be more of like an impact player on an every down basis, as opposed to, like the sack, in a game is nice, but it's like coming at like a random spot, in the middle of the game, and then anything else. Like, I will say he's shown flashes. Like that last drive, him and Josh Allen against the Houston Texans in Week 12. Like on one of those Josh Allen sacks, like Trayvon just completely, was a bomb detonated, like in the interior defensive line. So he's definitely shown flashes of being that guy, but I do think there's some pressure for him to be, that guy consistently.
Yeah, I think you can make a very similar argument for Devin Lloyd too, because he wasn't the first overall pick, but he still was a first round pick, and kind of the same deal where like he's shown flashes. Like even the first month of his rookie season, he was always kind of in the right place at the right time and made a lot of plays on the ball. And then like again, he's shown flashes and done like the Trayvon thing where he'll have like a super impressive run fit, or he'll have like a really nice deflection that I ever had to reach for. But like these nice moments come like in like a random second quarter. So it'd be nice to like just see it put together on a more consistent basis, especially like next to Mr. Consistency in Foye Oluokun. So if they can like actually be like a great duo together rather than Foye kind of lifting up Devin a little bit, and then same with Josh Allen lifting up Trayvon a little bit. If they can actually be pretty like dynamic and fearsome duos, that'd be pretty good.
The one thing I will say for both those guys is like it's not like either pick has been dead on arrival, where it's like just like brutal. Like neither pick's been like a Taven Bryan pick or a CJ Henderson or Caleb Von Chason, where after probably the first month you're like, huh, that's something. Yeah. Like they've at least flashed. I definitely think consistency is the big thing with both of them. And I agree with you. I do think there's some pressure on each of them, especially, I mean, you're talking contracts. Each guy's going to be 3 years in the NFL. Like, I'd assume they'd pick up the first round option on both of them. But I mean, after 3 years, you can start talking money. And wouldn't surprise me at all to see the Jaguars want to sign one of those guys early, maybe even Trayvon while you're in, the cheap years of the Trevor Lawrence deal. Gus, we're going to take a quick break for an ad. Then we'll be right back to talk about more Jaguars offseason. I'm counting the days down till training camp, buddy. All right, we'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Jaguars on SI podcast. John Shipley, my friend, co-host Gus Logue. Gus, how was your break?
The
one we just took.
10 seconds.
Yeah, I was able.
Peaceful, I guess it's a quiet house still, a quiet morning.
I noticed you didn't say thank you.
For you calling me your friend?
No, for giving you a 10-second break.
Oh, I didn't know.
Letting you take the foot off the content gas for a little bit. Some manners is all. Some manners is all I'm asking for. You're welcome.
Thanks for that moment of serenity.
Well, my grind doesn't stop. Don't know about you. On that note.
You're so wrong for that.
my grind frequently stops. When my grind gets started, that's the more notable moment. Yeah. All right. Next question I got for you guys. Next topic. I got asked this in the mailbag. Basically, what the hell happens if Ryan Nielsen really is all that and the Jaguars defense becomes really good under him? Which I think is a distinct possibility. You've thrown a lot of resources at it. You have one at least blue chip player and Josh Allen, and the potential for there to be more. But I guess the question is more so framed in, is this guy going to be a head coach like after 1 year if they're really good? And judging on how it seems like the relationships are on the defensive staff, I'd guess like half that staff would probably be gone if Ryan Nielsen.
Yeah, so it's not like easily have a bunch of in-house replacements,
including Chris Ricard. I would say,
yeah, that would be the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, and you'd think he'd be the favorite to replace Ryan Nielsen, but also the favorite to follow him. So,
right.
I mean, obviously the Jaguars need the defense to be improved this season, but what happens basically if that defense becomes that good? Like, do you think they run risk of losing Nielsen and having to start all over again, like third scheme in 3 years?
I guess, but like, isn't that a risk you're worth taking? Like, oh no, the defense is too good. Like,
yeah,
I made the case on a podcast or 3 ago that like I don't think Nielsen will be a head coach next year. I definitely think he's got to be good to be a head coach like in the next 3 years probably. But like next year, it's more so just about the market. Where like I think people are going to take Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel and even Bill Belichick over like a guy with a 1-year stint in Jacksonville and a 1-year stint in Atlanta. Even if the product is really good, but I feel like the other argument for like, oh no, like the defense is amazing. Like it would definitely be a shame to lose a great defensive coordinator in Nielsen. But then hypothetically, if the defense is performing really well, it's because it has a lot of good players on it. And so I feel like it wouldn't be that difficult of a job to fill. Like it's not like Doug Peterson is going to have to be like scouring the ranks of college football just to find like a decent replacement. Like I think there will be a decent amount of people that would like even line up for the Jags DC job if it flashes enough next year.
Does it feel like to you that that's what this is? Like it's kind of a get in here and overhaul this thing and fix it immediately, and whatever happens from there happens from there? Or does it feel to you like a long term kind of thing, like just your vibes, basically based on complete vibes?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. The vibes question.
Yeah, because like I don't know personally. Like I assume that Nielsen wants to be a head coach, but like I know for sure that Press Taylor wants to be a head coach. And like, so I just don't know like his own motive, which makes it a good question because I don't actually know the answer. So just based off vibes, I think like it's almost like a 2-year plan where it's like your job is like defense coordinator and like come fix the defense and like you're totally in charge. And then if like you're king of the castle and extremely good at it, then you're gonna like work your way into head coach opportunities, which will still probably be good for the Jags. Because even though, again, it would be a bummer to lose him, if you're losing Nielsen, that means he did a really good job. So like, I guess I feel like you have to kind of like take the good with the bad in that circumstance. And so I think their focus is like we're working to win the Jags a Super Bowl. And then if something else comes out of that, then we'll talk about it when it happens. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. Here's my next question. What happens first? Ryan Nielsen takes a head coaching job or Press Taylor takes a head coach interview?
Oh,
that's not saying it as a bit. Like I'm genuinely interested.
Yeah, no.
You've made it a bit now.
It was a well-phrased question. I go with the Ryan Nielsen head coach because I feel more confident in that happening at some point in time. Again, I don't really know when it'll happen, and I don't think it'll necessarily happen in this next year. But like, if Press Taylor never got an interview, I don't know if I'd be surprised.
I'll say this: 7 coaches hired last year. I think 5 of them were defensive coaches. Is the bit over of only hiring offensive guys?
I mean, yeah, I think so. And if you're going to hire an offensive guy, like you do it from the Shanahan or McVay tree. Even like Eric Bieniemy, like it's not like the Andy Reid tree in general isn't getting a lot of hires.
Yeah.
Is Matt Nagy still the Chiefs offensive coordinator?
I think so, yeah.
So I feel like there just haven't really been a lot of movement. And then like what's his name? Frank Reich last year was like a one and done coach. So the Andy Reid tree is kind of stalemating a little bit. And so I think, yeah, if someone is going to hire an offensive coach, they're going to look elsewhere.
That makes sense. I hope Ben Johnson's spurting somebody again. The reaction to him turning down the Washington job and then everything Washington has done since, I'm like, it's probably a good call.
Yeah, true. Man, I hope Jaden Daniels works out, but I wasn't super confident that he was going to before the draft, and now in like his landing spot.
Yeah. Be interesting to see play out, my friend. All right. Next topic of discussion. On Jaguar safety Andre Cisco went on NFL Sirius XM this week. Talked about a couple things. Talked about obviously the Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence extensions, but also talked about the AFC South. And he said the biggest difference I see is the quality of receivers in the division. I think the receivers have taken a huge jump from what the past 2 years have been in the division. Obviously, Ridley going to Tennessee. I know the Colts drafted a kid from Texas. The Texans were really good at receiver, but then they add Stephon Diggs. He said the quality of receiver has taken a step forward. I think quarterbacks in the NFL, you're not really going to play too many duds. So for me, it's kind of a regular day in the office in regards to who we're playing. But the receivers could definitely make a big difference. I think he has a point there about the quarterbacks to an extent, because other than like if you're playing like an injury riddled team or a team in transition or even maybe a team with a young quarterback, like most dudes can play. Like there's few quarterbacks on the roster on like the schedule here. Like, oh, this dude sucks. Like you're probably gonna go a couple of weeks of playing like some dudes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's your take on what Mr. Cisco thinks the biggest difference in the AFC South this year is? I still think quarterbacks are going to be the biggest factor in the AFC South. I mean, just between, I think you have two question marks in Anthony Richardson and Will Levis that will determine how well those teams do. I know a lot of people in on the Colts after they almost went to the playoffs with Gardner Minshew, and I'm an Anthony Richardson fan, but I want to see him stay healthy. So, like for me, I'm still kind of a question mark on the Colts, and then obviously Will Levis. Who knows what the hell's gonna go on there? So, what's your take? That's mine.
Yeah, I think it's more so like it's almost like a quarterback take being posed as like a receiver take because like I think the biggest difference is like the receiver rooms in general, but it's because of like the quarterbacks who have arrived and like every team in the division like feels that they have a quarterback worth building around, or like even in the Titans case, like worth building around to this extent of like let's see what he has, and then like I like their strategy because I feel like worst case scenario if Will Levis doesn't work out, then like you shed him for like nothing. It doesn't really cost that much, and then you can just draft a new guy and plug him into the same great environment. And so it's like when the Jags had Gardner Minshew, like if they were deciding like for resource allocation whether to take a linebacker or a receiver, like a linebacker might have had just as big of an impact on their team because like Gardner is not going to take like full or like fully maximize like a receiver's downfield ability or just really ability in general, probably. But now that every team in the division has a quarterback that they think might be their guy, like they're going to want to prioritize receivers and prioritize like just helping out their not just their guy but their young guy too, because that's important to really make their development as smooth as possible. It's because like it would be another thing if like when the Colts signed Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan, like those guys are like pros and veterans and like they can kind of get by without amazing receiver talent. But again, because every team in the division has a quarterback that they're trying to bet on, they're betting on them by investing around them and wide receivers.
That's actually a very poignant, sophisticated, and layered take, Gus. I'm almost surprised.
I know it's not why you invite me here.
Yeah, that was a good one. I agree with you. How would you rank the pass catching, I guess, groups of the four then after all these additions? I'm still going Colts at 4. I don't know. I'm not moved by Michael Pittman.
Yeah, Texans are definitely one.
Yeah, Texans are 1. Yeah, I'll give you Texans. Colts I think are at 4. Like Michael Pittman's good, but
nothing special. Yeah,
he's the Michael Pittman of receivers.
Yeah. Yeah, Colts at 4 is fair. Yeah, I'm trying like who do you take between D-Hop, Ridley, and
Tyler Boyd and
Tyler Boyd. Yeah, and Chitty Bang Bang.
I don't get that reference.
You don't? It's just like it's like a super old movie about like a flying car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that movie.
That's about it. But
it's called Herbie Fully Loaded. It sucks. Check my letterbox for my review. Go ahead.
Oh man, I'm struggling. I don't know. I think long term, I would rather have the Jags receiver room because like Kirk and Engram are like I think Engram is 29, Kirk is 27, Gabe Davis is probably like 26 or 27. So all those guys have a few years left, and then you got Brian Thomas in the wings for the long term. But the Titans obviously kind of have some aging stars between DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. So that's my answer. For this season alone, I would take the Titans.
I agree.
Receivers. But then for the future, I would take the Jags. If we're talking about like offense in general, though, including offensive line, definitely the Jags before the Titans.
Way I see it, Titans had the better receiver 1 and receiver 2, and Jags had the better receiver 3 and tight end.
Yeah.
That fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have one more segment coming up. We're going to take our final break, and we'll be right back for a couple more minutes on the Jaguars on SI podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Jaguars on SI podcast. John Shipley, my friend, co-host, Goblin, Gus Logue. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to come up with a new term for you each episode. That's going to be a new bit of mine, actually.
Yeah, we're off to a hot start with Goblin. I'm excited to see what you come up with next week.
Well, I like Tyler the Creator. All right. So
that's not how I do.
ESPN and Seth Walder did offseason grades for all teams now that the hay is more or less in the barn. The Jaguars got a C+, and that was tied with the Arizona Cardinals, New York Giants, and Washington Commanders. And like the C+ obviously isn't failing, but in terms of his grades, the only teams that was better than was the Detroit Lions at a C, the Atlanta Falcons at a C-, the Minnesota Vikings at a C-, the Dallas Cowboys at a D+, the Las Vegas Raiders at a D, and the New Orleans Saints at a D. So one way we'll look at it, the Jaguars were tied for the 7th worst grade. So obviously just one man's opinion, but he's basically his case was, he didn't mind the Trevor Lawrence, contract really. He did kind of question the defensive firings when the defense was better than the offense, which, while the defense had issues, I'd agree the defense did, punch at its, weight class more. He weirdly questioned the Josh Allen signing, said he would have let him play on the franchise tag. I think he might be the only person in the universe. I legitimately haven't seen anybody else ever have that take. So that's not going to fault him for it, but it's a new one. He applauded the Jaguars for a few other moves. We're signing some veterans, Eric Armstead, Ezra Cleveland, etc. For the biggest move, he said extending Trevor Lawrence. That's obvious. Biggest contract in franchise history. The move he liked, trading down and drafting Brian Thomas Jr. I'd agree with that. I'd say that's probably like, if you're just looking at it from a pure, team building process type of move, that's like, maybe that's not the most impactful move they made, but like from process, that's definitely like the biggest win, they had, like getting those 2 top 100 picks in next year's draft. Would you agree with that?
For sure. And then I feel like even the Ridley process was like, I mean, maybe you can call it a bad process, but you can also call it like an understandable process from the Jags end. Like they kind of like knew all the risks that they were taking by letting Ridley reach free agency. And then obviously they were pretty stunned, but they were able to come up with a decent backup plan by drafting Brian Thomas.
I'm not going to let you start applying the draft picks in the Brian Thomas trade, letting Ridley go. I'm not gonna. I can already see it. Like, oh yeah, we lost Ridley, but we got a 3rd and a 4th in Brian Thomas for it. No, they're separate.
Yeah, definitely the Jags were like disappointed to lose Ridley, but I don't know. I feel like they're getting faulted for it a little bit more than they should. Yeah. Maybe that's a wrong take.
No, I think now that you look back at it a few months later, it definitely looks better than it did in the exact moment when people like me killed them. But I don't have any regret. It's time to look bad. Yeah, things change. All right. I think that's definitely like probably the best move process-wise. I still think Eric Armstead, I know it's a little pricey for a guy with his age and injury history, but I think he's probably going to be the most impactful like actual move for the 2024 season.
I agree. My sneaky pick would be Gabe Davis because, like, I don't think he's like necessarily gonna like. But at the end of his contract, we're gonna look back and say like, oh, he 100% lived up 100% to the money he signed for. But I do think that like the Jaguars' process in terms of like how to fix the offense is pretty sound, and it was just what I was talking about in the last week of like essentially adding spacing to the offense with speed threats in order to just like open up the intermediate passing game, the short passing game, the entire running game, etc. And so I think the process was sound in trying to do that. And so I feel like Gabe Davis, like I don't think he's going to be more productive or even more effective than like Armstead, but that would be like my sleeper choice because I think it could end up turning out pretty well. And again, it's just good process.
That's a fair take. The move Walder disliked the most was losing Darius Williams, and he said the team got value in signing Mitch Morse and re-signing Ezra Cleveland, but lost Williams, who's coming off a strong season in which he allowed a better than average 1.0 yards per coverage snap to the Rams in free agency. losing is a weird word. Like they actively got rid of him.
Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna say, it seemed like another good process, almost similar to like Gabe Davis, and just the fact that I think they understand what they need to do to quote unquote fix their scheme. So for the defensive side of the ball, it was like Darius is a great player and had a great season last year, but he's very much like a off ball zone cornerback using his eyes. And the Jags under Nielsen for their cornerbacks are looking for big and physical and man coverage. And so like I think the process was pretty sound in terms of letting him go and then getting Ronald Darby as a direct replacement.
Yeah, I don't know. The narrative around the Darius Williams release has been so weird. It first got painted as, oh, they lost Darius Williams for cap related reasons. This is what happens when you spend in free agency, etc. Now you see them with almost $40 million in cap space. They could have easily kept Darius Williams. Easily. They didn't lose Darius Williams. They actively released him to create.
That's the move I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about Bonnke and like how he feels like he has future security based on the moves.
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't have like that's not a move you make unless like you're building the roster for years to come.
And then I was going to say Williams is around the age where cornerbacks, it feels like they can decline at any year, but his replacement for Williams, I believe, is the same exact age. So I can't really make that argument, and neither can they, for the record. So overall, he gave them a C+. Guts, I guess I just completely skipped over worst move. What do you think is the worst move that they made this offseason?
I don't know. Like I was gonna say,
they didn't make many mind-numbing ones.
I was gonna say losing Ridley, but at the same time, like letting him walk probably would be better than have to pay him like $24 million a year. Like then that would have almost been like the biggest like mistake or whatever of the offseason. So
I got one for you.
Trading for Mac Jones.
Trading for Mac Jones. I was actually going to say that as a bit, or at least considered it, but I know you mean it. So, okay. I got one for you.
Okay.
Not adding a running back.
A running back?
Yeah, I know Dearness Johnson, but you know what I mean. Huh?
They got Keelan Robinson.
You know what I mean. Not adding some competition for Tank Bigsby.
Yeah. Isn't Dearness still on the team?
He's not competition for Tank.
Yeah, no, that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I was thinking earlier, like that's fair because I was thinking when we were doing the expectation segment, like Travis Etienne has a lot of expectations because like he's gonna have to continue carrying the load all by himself until we see something otherwise.
Yeah. So and I don't know. It's a big bet, potentially impactful bet. Gus, overall grade, what are you giving them?
I was thinking B-. So I don't think that C+ is all that unfair. I think like I wanted to give them like a slightly above average grade because again, like on both sides of the ball, I think the process makes sense. Like obviously you didn't want to lose Ridley, but like I kind of understood what they were doing the whole time between like not wanting to give up a second round pick and then not wanting to pay him $24 million+ a year. But like I don't know if Walter in the ESPN article even mentioned like locking up Trevor Lawrence and Josh Allen because even though those are like two things that like should have always happened and should have always been the case, like the team absolutely still deserves credit for getting it done. And so and then even like with Mitch Morrison, Eric Armstead, like maybe they'll have like an early injury, knock on wood, and like really not make the impact at all that the team was hoping because I think the team really expect both of them on each side of the ball to like not just improve their specific position that they're like replacing someone with, but also like all the people around them.
Yeah.
And so like everything like makes sense to me, but we'll just see if it works out.
That's fair. I'd say I don't know when I'm struggling to come up with what I think is the worst move. You probably didn't have a bad offseason. Yeah, they didn't have any completely mind-numbing moves. I think. I know a lot of people were surprised.
It was just like nitpicking over like the day 3 picks, which is like it's not like I'm them anyway.
A lot of people were surprised about the Mason Smith pick. I think you probably see some people submit that as for what they think their worst move is. So I'd go B- as well. I get C+ because I think at the same time they didn't like locking up Allen and Lawrence, I think, was very important. I'm not going to give credit for Allen that much because it should have happened a while ago. I'll give credit. I'll give semi credit for Lawrence for choosing to do it now instead of waiting a year. Only semi credit because also, how much credit do you need for signing Trevor Lawrence? Not like I said though, not a lot of mind numbing moves. I'd say B- is fair. I also get C+ though because other than making important moves, they didn't swing for many home runs. Like I guess Eric Armstead, was their biggest swing, but would you consider that like a home run type swing? Like in terms of you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you get what I'm saying.
Really.
You get my narrative based question.
Swing is like the Titans trading for L'Jarius Sneed and then handing him a massive contract. Like, the Giants didn't do anything like that. Exactly. I honestly think we all got Balky ball this offseason. I think Balky had a pretty good offseason in terms of doing what he needed to do, because when I think about it, if the offense quote unquote fails this season and everyone is fully healthy, I kind of feel like they have all the pieces that they need. And so if it fails, then I'll point my finger at coaching. And then same for the defense. I think maybe their depth is not quite at contender level, but at the same time, I think they have enough pieces to make it work. And so if the defense fails, then I'm going to point more so to coaching. And so I think Balky has set up himself very well, but also just the team.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. All right, I got one last quick rapid fire question because I got to get the hell out of here. Actually, go to work at the Miller Electric Center.
MEC.
Yep. All right. So, which offseason will age better in your opinion? 2022 or 2024? You got 5 seconds to answer this. Don't think about it. Don't give me an explanation. Just pick
2024. Because it was the year that Trevor signed an extension. Yeah. And Josh Allen. So and I don't know, Brian Thomas, between those three.
And I guess the 2022 offseason, Kirk and Ingram and Fourier are three building blocks. But other than that, how much of that class is really still around?
The most notable things from 2022 were free agent additions, which is they deserved credit, but at the same time, a big reason they got those additions was just by spending more money than other teams were willing to spend. And so I think they actually, in terms of the process and work done, I think I guess we'll see what happens in terms of what we look back on. But for right now, I definitely think that 2024 was the most impressive offseason they've had in a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fair. All right, I know I said last question. This is really the last question.
Okay.
It's probably the most important question I've asked you in a while. And I want you to shoot straight down the line, no BS. All right. Can you promise me that?
Yeah, I promise.
Does this hat make my eyebrows look bushy? It does, doesn't it? Go to hell.
I wasn't thinking it before. It's that kind of thing where you only notice if you point it out to someone. But I was looking at you the whole podcast and I didn't think it until you said it.
I'm burning this hat.
Right. It's a cool hat. I like the hat.
It was, yeah. All right. We'll end it. Thank you guys for joining the Jaguars on SI podcast. John Shipley, my friend, co-host, Goblin of the Week, Gus Lug. We'll see what I call him next week. Thank you guys for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube at Jaguars on SI podcast. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Enter questions for our mailbag. You can find a link to that at the end of every article. Something I probably should have done for the last 5 years. Gus, you got anything else to add?
No, let's get out of here. Let's go talk to Trevor.
Good call. Good call. Thank you guys again for 106, and we'll be back next week. Don't forget, you got Balky Balls.